joining us from. This is Jarl Crocker. I'm Director of Training and Technical Assistance here at the Community Action Partnership, and this is the fourth webinar in our 4-webinar series on the Community Needs Assessment. So thank you all again for tuning in. We hope the series has been informational and look forward to wrapping it up with this last webinar. So before we get going, a couple of housekeeping items to start out with. First of all, I'm joined by Courtney Kohler, our Senior Associate. We'll be doing the webinar together this afternoon. So Courtney, you want to introduce yourself really quickly?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Courtney Kohler. I'm a Senior Associate with the Community Action Partnership, working in the Training and Technical Assistance team. So I came from the Missouri State Association formerly and been in community action for about 4 years now.
Great. Thanks so much, Courtney. And a number of things before we get going. First off, we are recording this webinar, and recordings of this webinar and the previous 3 webinars, along with those slides, can be accessed on the partnership's homepage. If you go to the Events tab at the top of our homepage and go down to Webinars, if you just scroll down shortly, you'll see all of the Community Needs Assessment videos, and we're also uploading them to our Tools and Resources section in the video library. And I'll show you a slide in just a few seconds so you can make sure that you know how to access those resources. Secondly, if you have any technical issues during the webinar, you can message Liza Porras directly using the chat function. There's an option to send a message directly to one of the panelists, so just choose Liza and send in your question if you have any technical difficulties with the audio or video, and hopefully Liza can help you resolve those issues. We will also be taking questions throughout this webinar. We'll stop at a couple of points to take questions that have come in. But you can use your chat function to send in those questions at any time, and again, we'll just answer them in the order that they come in at a couple of different points throughout the webinar. And as always, since we're probably not going to be able to answer all your questions this afternoon, please feel more than free to reach out directly to either myself or Courtney if we can be of any assistance on your community needs assessment or with any other training and technical assistance needs. The partnership is here to support our members, so please don't hesitate to let us know if you have a question or if we can help you out with anything. So with that, let's jump into the webinar content itself. So just to review the agenda, what we'll cover today, again, this is the 4th webinar in our 4-webinar series on the Community Needs Assessment. And so last time we covered how to analyze your Community Needs Assessment data. And so in this final webinar, we will look at how to make sure you're effectively communicating the results of your needs assessment to a variety of different stakeholders in a variety of different ways. So we're going to start off, as always, just by highlighting a couple of key partnership and other resources for the needs assessment, just to make sure that you know where those live on our webpage and what we have to support our agencies. Then I'm going to start out with just a couple of brief slides talking about writing the Community Needs Assessment. We're not going to go into a whole lot of detail there, but just want to give you a general sense of the framework that you might use and what to include when you write the Community Needs Assessment. And then we'll talk about why to share the needs assessment and who to share it with. So we'll talk about working with your board, but also presenting the needs assessment data to other stakeholders. And then Courtney is going to wrap us up in the second half of the webinar with a variety of different techniques for how to share your community needs assessment data. So we really think this is going to be an information-packed session. And again, send in those questions to us directly. We'll answer them in the order that they come in. And obviously, Courtney and I are here to answer any other questions you have offline if there's any other follow-up. So to begin with, partnership resources, you see the arrow and the circle around our tools and resources section. This is where we keep most of our TNTA resources. And you see right beside that, if you can squint and look a little bit more closely, there's also an events drop-down menu. And if you wanted to access previous webinars, you could just click on that events section, go down to webinars, and both the recordings and the slides for this webinar series are there. and we will also update our webinar video library section in the Tools and Resources drop-down menu as well, so you'll be able to access these webinars in both places. You can also access the other resources I'm going to tell you about in that Tools and Resources drop-down menu. So first off, I want to make sure everybody knows about the technical assistance guides we have to help agencies make sure that they're meeting the organizational standards. We have one guide for every category, including Category 3, the community assessment, and these guides have background on interpretation of the standards, some guidance on the documentation that you might want to use, and also there are additional resources included. So we've got web links to other guides, manuals, and additional resources. So this isn't just a resource to help you every year when you're going through the assessment process with the standards. It's really a year-round capacity building resource to help our agencies across all of the issues that the standards touch upon, including the needs assessment. So if you haven't taken a look at our TNCA guides, please do so. I know we're in the second year of the organizational standards, and I think these guides are extremely helpful and one of the best resources we have as a network to make sure that our agencies are in compliance with the standards. Moving on, there is also a wonderful guide from NASCAS called A Community Action Guide to Comprehensive Community Needs Assessments. It walks you through every stage of the assessment process, and it has a variety of other links and connections to other resources, everything from help to designing a survey to how you would organize the data collection process, and there are also a number of different helpful templates and other tools to support you with your needs assessment. So if you haven't taken a look at this guide, I think it's the most comprehensive resource out there for helping a community action agency through every step of the needs assessment process. I would strongly suggest that you download it and take a look at it before you start your next needs assessment process if you don't always do that as a matter of course. And you can get this guide online. It's free of charge. You can either go to the NASCAS website, that is nascasp.org, NASCSP.org, or you can just type in the title of that guide to Google, and it's, I think it's the first one that pops up, and you can just download a PDF copy directly. So before we get into the nitty-gritty details of communicating your needs assessment, I also want to remind folks of the overall community action planning cycle just to make sure we're all on the same page. And as you can see there, the community needs assessment is really the top of the cycle. It is the first step in our ROMA cycle as well, conducting an assessment. And I just want to make sure to reemphasize the importance, especially since we're talking about communicating the needs assessment. So at this point in time, you would be finished with the research and probably the writing on your needs assessment. And just a reminder that ideally agencies will be going directly into the strategic planning process. So I'll talk in a few slides about the importance of making sure you're communicating your needs assessment to your board, because they play a crucial role in the strategic planning process. But I think it's just a good reminder to make sure that you are on cycle with the overall community action planning process, and making sure that when you're doing your strategic planning process, it's as close as reasonably possible to the end of your needs assessment process, because they're really just an extension of the same overall planning cycle, the same overall ROMA framework that all community action agencies use. And again, the needs assessment obviously establishes what needs the community has, and the strategic plan is your agency's overall big picture strategies for how they're going to respond to the needs identified in the assessment. And again, that really starts with making sure that your board is up to date on what the needs assessment has found, because your board is ideally going to be providing you with that key feedback and guidance and direction on how to develop those overall strategic plan outcomes, strategies, and the big picture approach your agency is going to take. And so if they don't have the information in the needs assessment, it's that much harder for them to play that role in the strategic planning process. So just a reminder to make sure that you are on cycle with how you're conducting the different elements of the overall community action planning process. So let's talk a little bit more about how to share your needs assessment, who you want to share it with, what format that might take, and then Courtney, again, in the second half of the webinar, will give you some really great concrete ideas and examples for how you want to get this information out. So to start out with, how do we utilize data from the needs assessment? And I really want to stop and just emphasize this. I do a lot of training on the needs assessment, and when I ask who do you share your needs assessment with, how do you get those results out into the community, or do you even do this, fewer agencies put their hands up than I would really like to see. I would say a minority of our agencies across the network really do significant work when it comes to sharing the needs assessment more broadly. And we'll talk in more detail about the stakeholders that you want to share it with. But I think certainly your board, and we'll talk in more detail in a second about sharing it with them, would be a set of folks that you would definitely want to make sure gets the results. Certainly your key partners, the communities you work with, both your customers and the neighborhoods they live in, other groups, grassroots organizations, certainly other sectors like the business sector, the faith community, other service providers, and certainly elected officials and the media. And so we're doing a deep dive on how you reach out to those different sectors, the different ways that you might want to present that data, and some concrete ideas and different techniques for making sure that you're getting that information out in different ways. But I think it's crucially important because the needs assessment is really one of the best resources that we have in community action for talking about poverty as an issue, for helping raise awareness of poverty in the communities that we serve, and also for setting the agenda, building consensus on how we address poverty in our communities, both with our fellow partners that we work with, but also with other sectors in the community, with elected officials and the community as a whole. So I think your mindset for the needs assessment should really be that it is one of your best communication, messaging, branding, and general awareness building opportunities to get that message out to the rest of the community. And so I think moving forward, making sure that you have that plan in place as early as possible for how to get all this information out. And I think we've been emphasizing that throughout this series, that you want to be connecting with those different stakeholders, those different sectors throughout the process, both to help you with the data collection process, maybe partner with you, certainly serve as key informants, folks to help you with surveys. But now that we're in this final stage, you would want to engage those partners to get the word out about the needs assessment results, make sure they're informed about what you found, and really leverage and maximize the opportunity you have to use those needs assessment findings to make sure folks know about poverty-related issues, that you have a clear agenda as a community, and that folks are aware of who community action is, what your mission is, what services you provide, and of course, about poverty as an issue in your service area. So let's start out with just a few tips on writing the report. We're not going to go into a lot of detail here, but just a few key things we want to make sure that you remember. So first of all, in your report, make sure that you've got that key findings section relatively close to the front, probably right after the introduction. You would want to highlight, and we usually say, you know, those 5 to 7 pages of analysis of what your key findings are, but also your analysis of the underlying causes of poverty and those issues in your community. And I think that's an important section because that's one that you can basically take out and use as a standalone section to communicate to different stakeholder groups. So when you're writing that section, you know, you're thinking about sort of a medium-sized document, like I said, about 5 to 7 pages long, so it should really be packed with information, very clear, very concise analysis of those underlying causes, and when you're writing it, think about it as something that you would hand out as an independent section of the needs assessment to help other stakeholders be aware of what those top issues are, and also have some basic sense of why your community, why your service area is experiencing those issues. So don't just make this a dry report as you write it. Think about what stakeholders you're going to send it out to. Make sure the language you use is direct, clear, and concise, and think about it, as you're writing it, as one of your primary tools that you'll take out of the broader assessment report as a whole and pass it around, send it around to different stakeholder groups. I would also strongly suggest that right after that key findings section, you include a brief section which are your recommendations based on what you found, based on the interviews that you've conducted with key informants, your focus groups. And this is really your opportunity to help build consensus in your community about what to do about these big picture needs. So we know community action agencies have limited resources. You can't address every need that you found in your needs assessment, but what you can do with the recommendation section is help bring those other stakeholders in, your other key partners in, and make some recommendations about what your community needs to do to start addressing some of those high priority needs. And I think this section can also be a standalone section. I think it can just be as short as maybe 2 or 3 pages at the most, and simply highlighting, again, what you think some of those top-level policy changes that need to be made, other recommendations for things service providers can do, elected officials can do, you as a community can do. And again, it's a really great opportunity to build that consensus on a policy agenda moving forward that you would work with your key partners, other stakeholders in the community, and the community itself. And so think about it as your opportunity to really begin to build that consensus if you're not already working on an overall policy agenda. And if you are, by all means, include it in this particular section. Connect it to what you found in your needs assessment. But would strongly recommend that you've got that section where you're providing a concrete list of actions the community can take, not just you as a community action agency, but your community can take to address the underlying causes of poverty. You would also certainly want to describe the assessment goals and methods, so have a short methodology section where you talk about how you collected and analyzed the data. And then you would want to organize the bulk of your write-up according to the findings across the different domains that you've included in the needs assessment. So that should really be the bulk of the needs assessment itself. And again, how long those sections are probably going to vary depending on how many you've included, how large your service area is, but you should think about them as almost mini reports for each of those domains. And again, you can take out those different sections. Say you have a domain on housing and another one on education and another one on healthcare. You could take those sections out and use them with those different sectors of stakeholders, or again, as ways to chunk out different sections of your needs assessment. So as you're writing, you should always be thinking of other audiences that you might want to distribute your findings to, and basically how to break up the different pieces of your needs assessment to get the word out as broadly as possible to those different stakeholders. And then finally, just a reminder, include the raw data in an appendix. Don't clutter up the findings themselves. Most needs assessments are long enough as it is without including tons and tons of data. You can just always include the raw data in an appendix and just pull out the particular charts, tables, other graphic representations of those data, and I think be a little bit more thoughtful and strategic, because you don't want to beat people over the head with numbers too much. You want to have clear, concise analysis. So this next slide, I know the writing is a little bit difficult to see, but it just walks through the outline that I just talked through and hopefully gives you an idea of the sections that you would want to include in your needs assessment. But again, the message here is think about the different sections of your needs assessment as tools that you would take those pieces out and send to other stakeholders. So don't think of your needs assessment as an internal document. This is something that you're going to be organizing into different forms to present to different stakeholder groups. And I think the more you think of its use in that way as you're writing it and as you're organizing it, it just makes for less less work as you then go through that process of putting it into different forms, working with different sets of stakeholders. So now I want to start talking about who you're going to send the information to, and start with your board, since I think that is one of the most important set of folks who needs to get the information in the needs assessment. So, of course, Standard 3.5 says the governing board formally accepts the completed community assessment. So to simply meet the standard, all you would have to do is have a formal board action to accept the needs assessment, but I think that there's a lot of extra steps that you would want to put in there to make sure the board has fully processed that information. So I want to give you some additional sections to go, or ideas to go beyond compliance, because the board really needs to be familiar with the findings of the needs assessment, and it needs to be more than just a short 5-minute conversation. So some tips for working with your board to make sure they have all the information that they need and that they fully process what is in the needs assessment. So first, good practice would be to provide a report to review before the meeting to your board. And again, while ideally your board would read the needs assessment in its entirety, they are volunteers, and I think you're probably talking about a fairly small group of people who's going to read the needs assessment cover to cover. So you might consider providing your board with a summary, the key findings section, or some way just to make their job a little bit easier to process and digest that information. You could certainly provide them with the whole report if they wanted to do a deeper dive, but would strongly suggest that you provide a shorter version, a summary, some other way to make sure they're getting that key information without taxing them too much and expecting them to read, you know, a 50 or 100-page report in great detail. Next, make sure when you talk about the needs assessment to the board, when you present it for their review, that you've made enough time on your board agenda to really get into the details of the needs assessment. I think it might even be a meeting where, aside from you know, whatever you absolutely have to do at the meeting, you really spend the bulk of the time going through the needs assessment, have a senior staff person present the findings to the board, answer all their questions, really make sure that they understand what those key issues are that you've identified, what are the top priorities, and really have that chance to talk through those findings. Again, like I said, you might want to organize the information to provide those key highlights for them. Don't rely on them to read through the entirety of the needs assessment. Make their life as easy as possible. During this, I would also emphasize the connection of the needs assessment to the strategic planning process. Make sure the board knows how those two processes connect to each other, and also make sure the board knows that in the strategic planning process, they'll be providing the agency with guidance on strategies to address those needs that you've identified in the assessment. So just make sure they know how that whole process works, what they're going to be using those needs assessment findings for, just so they know what's coming up. You might even want to provide an additional training on the strategic planning and needs assessment process to your board, just because it is so crucially important, and it is one of the key board roles to know what's in the needs assessment and to provide guidance based on that to the agency on their strategic plan. Another suggestion would be to provide the board with a refresher or a training on Roma principles, simply because that's so crucial to getting the strategic plan right. You really want to have an outcome-driven strategic plan that's responsive to the needs assessment. And I also think it helps make it a little bit clearer to the board what they'll be doing in the strategic planning process and how to link the needs assessment with the strategic plan, that they're trying to identify outcomes that address the key needs that you've identified in the strategic plan, and make sure the agency has in place a set of strategies that they follow that will hopefully achieve those outcomes. And So it's just a good opportunity to provide the board with a refresher on those ROMA principles and reemphasize the connection between the needs assessment and the strategic planning process. And of course, the last bullet point on your screen, it is required to make sure that the board has accepted the needs assessment, and that's officially recorded in the minutes, just so you can show that you meet that organizational standard, that 3.5. So I want to give you some high-level points on why you want to make sure that you're sharing your needs assessment as broadly as possible. And I think these are some of the key outcomes that you also want to achieve by reaching out to other stakeholders. So at the very top of the list, your needs assessment and its results are one of the best tools you have to raise awareness of poverty in the broader community. So you want to make sure the rest of your community as a whole, not just your customers, not just the neighborhoods they live in, not just the partners that you work with, but the broader community as a whole is aware of those key findings in the needs assessment. It's, like I said, it's your opportunity, it's your platform, it's your capacity building resource to make sure the community knows about the causes and conditions of poverty in your service area, because in a lot of cases, poverty is hidden. It's not something that gets talked about by the rest of the community. It's not necessarily on the public's radar screen. So your needs assessment is really an opportunity to have a public conversation about poverty in your community. Secondly, your needs assessment is a great opportunity to raise awareness of the agency. It's a great opportunity to raise awareness about the brand of community action, to talk about the mission of your agency in your community, and also to make sure that you're publicizing the services that you and your partners are providing to the community. So look for opportunities to share that type of information in the course of working with other stakeholders and getting the message about the needs assessment out. Third, as I've mentioned, it is a great opportunity to build or continue to build upon the anti-poverty agenda you've developed with other stakeholders. I think that's why that recommendation section is so important. That might even be something that you work with other stakeholders to craft to begin to build that consensus, but use the needs assessment as a springboard, if you're not already doing so, to bring your key partners together, bring other stakeholders together who work on anti-poverty issues, and develop that policy agenda, those other recommendations, those things that you could only do as a collection of stakeholders, whether it's around advocacy or creating a collaborative or similar form of stakeholders. So use your needs assessment as a way to help build that consensus. And then lastly, make sure that you're using your needs assessment as a fundraising tool. I think you could use the data in part of your regular appeals to funders, but you can also use it proactively. Use it as an opportunity to bring the funders that you work with together, or go out to them individually to make sure that they know about the results of the needs assessment, and it's a great way to help lay the groundwork for later asks or other connections that you're going to build with those funders. And many of them, folks like community foundations or other funders that you work with, probably want to know the results of your needs assessment. They would probably find it useful for their work, so it's a great way to build those relationships and lay the groundwork for future support, hopefully, of those funders on behalf of your mission and your work. So some examples of who to think through sharing this information with, and then Courtney will talk in a little bit more detail about how you might want to share that information in different forms and provide you with some great ideas, concrete suggestions for how to get that message out. So we've already talked about your board, some of the things you want to do to make sure you're effectively communicating the results of your needs assessment to your board. Certainly your partners, you would want to share the needs assessment with them, either in one-on-one meetings, just to make sure there's enough time for discussion. Or as a group, you could certainly bring your key partners together in a special meeting to talk about your needs assessment results. And just a reminder that if you are a public agency, make sure to share the results of the needs assessment with your contractors or grantees, because they need to be aware of the results of the needs assessment. And it's certainly helpful for creating that common sense of mission and a sense of common objectives in their work to make sure that they know what's in that needs assessment So they can also incorporate it into the work that they do for you as a public agency and maybe other services that they provide, other projects that they're working on. Community members, I would strongly consider having a community meeting or a forum or going out to different neighborhood meetings. So, for example, if you have strong neighborhood associations in your service area, you could do presentations on the needs assessment results to them. But you want to make sure that the community knows what's in the needs assessment. Again, that's your opportunity to build awareness of poverty-related issues and also to build consensus on that policy agenda. So think beyond the community that you typically serve. Look for those other opportunities to present needs assessment results in communities that you don't necessarily work with to provide services to on a regular basis. You would certainly want to present the needs assessment findings to other sectors, so folks from the business community, the faith community, the education sector. All those folks that you've reached out to help you with the data collection and probably data analysis process, you would want to make sure that they get the results. And those could be through presentations at collections of stakeholders where they gather. So if there are collaboratives, roundtables, advisory groups that bring together those stakeholders from other sectors, those would be the places you would be looking for to do probably a shorter presentation on your needs assessment findings. As I mentioned, local funders would also be people to reach out to, either through one-on-one meetings or presentations at funder events. So if there's a network of funders, funders roundtable, similar body, you would want to make sure to reach out to them and present the findings in that particular forum. Elected officials, you would certainly want to be presenting the needs assessment results to those bodies. For your congressman, for example, you might want to send the results or a short summary directly, but certainly for your local elected officials, if you have the opportunity to do a more direct presentation, again, that's a great way to make sure that poverty-related issues are on their consciousness, and a reminder, again, of the work that community action does is never a bad thing, I think, for local elected officials. But again, make sure that you're reaching out directly to them. And finally, don't forget the media in all its forms. Radio stations, your local press, any social media outlets that folks use. That's another great way to get the results of the needs assessment out. You can do that through interviews. You can connect the press with folks that you work with, in addition to interviews for your staff. Help them with stories that you might want to tell that highlight different results of the needs assessment, different issues that you're working on. So make sure that the press knows, and you basically help them immensely by pulling all this information together, and you just need to work with them to help translate that into sound bites, news stories, and other things that are going to be useful for them. So again, the press is one of the best ways to get the results of the needs assessment out, so make sure you've been working with them throughout that process. So some last thoughts before I turn it over to Courtney. Thinking about the different ways that you want to organize the information in the needs assessment. So you would probably want to have a one-pager that's a very high-level summary of the needs assessment findings that you can hand out to everyone from local elected officials to your partners, the people at community meetings, and this would be just the key information that you would want to communicate. You're definitely going to want to do a press release and send that out widely, and hopefully follow that up with direct engagement with your local media. You want that key findings section, like I said, that 5 to 7 page section where you highlight your top needs and your analysis of the underlying causes and conditions of poverty in the community. This is a great resource. It's a little bit longer, so it provides folks with a bit more in-depth information, and again, raises awareness of what those top issues are, and hopefully makes the case for those recommendations. And certainly you would want that probably 2 to 3 page recommendation section to hand out as well. That's a great way, again, to build consensus on that policy agenda and hopefully begin to lay the seeds for work supporting maybe changes in how resources are distributed, how stakeholders work together, how you can engage the public. But again, those recommendations, I think, are really important, especially for building that consensus with the other stakeholders or partners that you work with. You would want to turn the needs assessment findings into a slide deck and possibly a webinar. That's another way to get that information out. You could have a short version and a long version, but that's a good way to get out the results of the needs assessment to your partners, maybe to folks like the education community, ways that you can reach a larger number of stakeholders through a web-based presentation and associated resources that could then live on your website and you can continue to use to get that word out. Infographics, Courtney is going to talk about this in more detail, but think about colorful, easy to read and understand ways to visually represent the data in your needs assessment. And then finally, only at the very bottom is the full report, because we know not very many people are going to read through that as a whole, but you would want to have that, say, up on your website, readily available for folks who do want to do that deeper dive. So before I hand the mic over to Courtney, I just want to see if there are any chat questions that have come in.
All right, I'm not seeing any, Gerald.
Okay, so I'm not seeing any chat questions. Again, please feel more than free to put your questions into the chat window, but otherwise, Courtney, take it away.
All right. Well, thank you, Jarl. So I'm going to be talking a little bit more about how to share the community needs assessment and different ways that it can be shared so that it meets those audience needs. So just kind of a review of what Jarl has already talked about. You want to make sure you always share with a very clear and concise message on the needs. So, determining what has been identified and prioritized as the needs. Making sure that those top priority needs are given to the community and your stakeholders, the outcomes maybe that you are determining through the strategic planning process, recommendations, and resources. So those are some different kind of buckets of pieces that can be shared through your messaging. And you want to make sure also that you make it creative and then make it really accessible for people. So make sure you're thinking about where are people already at, where are people already accessing information. You want to use colorful things. You want to use very visually appealing pieces, so charts, graphs, and dials. You can use those straight out of Community Commons, which I'll talk a little bit more in a moment. You can create infographics to display numbers. There's different online resources that are available, such as Pictochart or Canva or WordCloud, that can help kind of visually represent the needs that are in the community. And then also posting on the agency website and social media, so looking at the different platforms to get it out there. So we're going to kind of go through each of those. So first of all, with Community Commons, this is the Community Needs Assessment tool. If you've been on some of our other webinars, we've talked about this. It's a great tool for helping to collect your data. It's a great tool for analyzing your data. It's also a great tool for sharing your data. So it already creates these beautiful maps, very colorful, and helps to visually represent kind of where the needs are at or who has the needs. It helps to also put out some good charts for you, as well as some dials that show you comparison of needs. So this is kind of an example of a map through the location opportunity footprint. And we can help you with that if you need help on learning how to use some of the different mapping tools. But you want to kind of go through in Community Commons and pull out 3 different pieces. So looking at demographics, looking at the geography, as well as the comparison. So demographics is one way to start, and you want to let the community know who has the need. And so through sharing that information, you have these charts that come out. So they usually come out with each county, and then they go through the different demographics. So this is going through age and gender in the different counties, in this example in Missouri. And then they also put out some good charts or graphs. So the pie chart here that you see on age and gender demographics, these can be very good to share. You can put these into social media posts. You can put them into your infographics that you're sharing, of course, as well as your full summary report that you're sharing with funders and the more full information that you're giving out. So these can really be inserted in a variety of forms that you're sharing. Then, of course, geography. So I touched a little bit on the fact that we have the mapping tool within Community Commons. And so you know, usually whenever you go into the Community Needs Assessment tool, you can go to Hubs and then create the report, or you can go to the maps and you can create these maps. And so this is an example of, in Nebraska, an intersection of nutrition and transportation. So this can often help you layer the data and then show that to the community on how different issues intersect throughout the community. So looking at this transportation and nutrition, you see that major supermarkets are the blue dots, and then the low transportation cost index by tract. The darker areas are where transportation is more affordable. The lighter areas is where transportation is less affordable. So you can kind of see where major supermarkets might be, and it might be in those light blue areas where transportation is less affordable for people to possibly access those food resources. So these really help you to show the community where the need is and give them that visual representation. Then as far as comparisons go, you can let the community know how the need in that area, your specific service area, is in relation to the state or national averages or other service areas throughout your state. And so looking at these two examples here, it actually shows you both the bad and the good. So the red dials that you get, this is an example from Arizona, so Yuma County, Arizona. You can see how the poverty rate in that area is pretty high. It's 21.1%. And so that is greater than both the state and the national average. So that helps to tell a story to the community. Then on a good example, so the poverty rate in Douglas County, Colorado, is actually quite low. And so it's 3.4%, and you can see how that relates to Colorado as well as the United States as a whole. So this kind of helps to prioritize the needs, not only internally, but whenever you share it out to the community. It can be one thing to tell the community what the needs are, but to be able to show them with this visual representation, you know, in a quick overview through this dial is really powerful sometimes. So then moving on to infographics. So of course I've already said that a lot of those visual pieces that come out of Community Commons can be put into infographics. So a lot of these kind of roll into each other. But these infographics can really help to share bite-sized pieces with everyone. So, I mean, who doesn't love a good infographic? You know, you want to keep it simple. You want to be able to kind of keep the conversation going, so letting people continue to think after they look at your infographic. Maybe determine some questions of their own and look more into the issue is kind of what you want to have happen after people look at that infographic. And you want to be able to contextualize the numbers with client success stories. And so not just sharing what are the needs, but showing through a story, which can be really powerful to give kind of that more human touch to it, what those success stories are or stories of need. And so that can, your numbers plus those stories can really kind of give that comprehensive picture of what's going on in the community. So this is an example of an infographic. So this is childhood poverty in Boone County, Missouri, actually, and so, or Boone County, Kentucky, rather. Sorry about that. And so there's basically, you know, you see these different visual representations. There's a lot of data and percentages that are put out here. They're colorful, and so you can kind of see. Also, it gives you a picture of the area that you're looking at. So much information can be shared through an infographic. And then this is another example, so it kind of compartmentalizes the information, looking at, you know, how many people are in poverty in Charlotte County, and then you go down into what you can do. So it kind of gives that people that like action step afterwards. and not only, the depressing state of the needs, but also, what can you do to make a difference? What is the agency doing around this issue and that sort of thing. So for infographics, you can actually create your own. You don't necessarily have to have a graphic designer on staff. There's some great online resources to where you can do this yourself. So a couple of those, this is just another example of an infographic, but a couple of the resources, Pictochart is one, and so you go to pictochart.com, and you can actually receive a nonprofit discount as well if you purchase, but there's also some free templates that you can use before you decide to purchase. So if you want to play around with it a bit, you can do that. But here is an example of one that was created on Pictochart. But it is just simple and colorful and just really gives that story of what's going on in the community, what the agency has done, actually, in this case. Canva is the other one that you can go to, and there's some different free features on there, but then you can request that nonprofit discount to be able to purchase a version that gives you more features and templates. Another way to kind of visually put out your data or your qualitative information actually is through a word cloud. And so this is another free resource. You go to wordle.net and you can make these word clouds for free. All you do is type in a whole bunch of text with, like these words that were on a screen would all be in a text box, and you just hit create. And then you can, change the colors, you can change the structure of the words, and just copy and paste it straight into your document or infographic or social media post. So then where to share the community needs assessment information. We've already talked about this a little bit through how to share it, but more specifically we want to look at what are the different platforms to put the information out there. So first of all, you definitely want to make sure you have it on your website. And on the website, you want to make sure that the information that's included is the definition of the need or the needs, plural. You want to share what your goals and strategies are around that also, so how the agency is working to address it. If you haven't, if you're posting it before you've done your new strategic planning process, you can always share how it's been addressed in the past, or that you're about to embark on your strategic planning process. But really making sure you're defining what those needs are as well as what the agency does. Then social media is another area that you want to make sure you're getting this information out there. So with social media, you're looking at Facebook, Twitter, even LinkedIn if you're using that platform. And Instagram can be another good one if your agency uses it. It's very visual. But you want to make sure you're sharing facts and that you're also contextualizing the data through the stories. So Facebook, since you're able to write more, that can be a really good place to put some of those stories out there, of course, with prior approval or making them more anonymous. But these are really great ways to share, and this is where people are at. People are on Facebook, people are on Twitter. So whenever you share on your website, again, you want to make sure you get that data out there, you get what the needs are. And so this is a good example from Community Action Inc. of where they're sharing their community needs assessment information, as well as the outcomes from their agency or the outputs. So they're saying, that these are kind of the areas of need, and that the agency has helped 135 people who avoided homelessness, or they've, the car seats safely installed and inspected. There were 650 of those. So being able to say, these are the community needs, and this is how the agency is addressing them. This is an example of sharing on social media. So this is on Twitter. Of course, you have to be brief on Twitter, but you can share a photo, just being very brief even, and giving out a big number can be good because people don't want to be overwhelmed with information. They'll often scroll through if it looks too much. But then you can put just a short little blurb and always link to your website and include hashtags, of course. So here's just another example of sharing on social media. So being able to use some of those charts and graphs to share the picture of the needs in the community. And then, of course, using the mapping tool. So this is actually just using I think just a Google Maps, but of course you can pull those maps out of community comments to be able to include in social media posts, and then of course accessing or providing access to the full report, since you're giving just tidbits on social media, is always a good best practice so that people can learn more if they're interested. These are some sample community needs assessment tweets, so you can just take these and literally insert your own information and just have a few templates to run off of. You can say that XYZ agency is assessing community needs. All local input is valuable. Add some hashtags, put a link to a survey. So this actually in your data collection process, you can use social media to get the word out that you're doing the process. Then whenever you are actually have some of the data, you can put out there that a certain county has so many kids living in poverty. This is what we're working with this one partner to change that. And then also another example, once your full report is published, you can say, view our key findings on the causes and conditions of poverty, and then link to your website, and of course hashtags, so you get all those categorized on social media. So with Facebook, of course, you can say more than you can on Twitter, so this is a really good place, again, to just tell that story. Client success stories, or kind of a story of the need. If you're able to, of course, you would have consent if you're sharing personal information. But also sharing pictures from your community needs assessment process. So if you had focus groups, of course, another side note on that is that any, if you have focus group photos that you're sharing, you might have to have some sort of a release to be able to share photos of those people, let them know, make sure it's approved. But it's good to show the work that you're doing. So even internal meetings at your agency where you're reviewing and analyzing the data, you can show pictures from that so people see the work that goes into the process and who's involved. Also talking about the challenges that have been faced and the depth or importance of the final product through Facebook. Letting people know kind of what was involved in the process, all the research that your agency did. Of course, linking to the full report and your website is always good as well to let people get more information. And then, of course, saying thank you through social media to clients as well as the community members who participated in your surveys, in your focus groups, and whatever other data collection methods that you did. So another piece that you don't want to forget about, not just virtual, but you want to make sure that you are sharing through community and advocacy meetings. So showing that you are the poverty expert in your area and really lifting your organization up in that way. And also sharing the resources that you bring to the table. So letting people know, like, hey, we just did a whole bunch of research. And this is something that can be used in your organization, and we want to make sure that we're all looking at this and collectively addressing it. And then also it helps to demonstrate those resources that are still needed by sharing this information. So being able to put those thoughts together in relation to these community needs can be very good. All right, well, I think at this point we'll go ahead and pause to take some questions. I think we've actually had maybe one or two come through. Let me look real quick.
Hey, Courtney, we just had one quick question on how often agencies have to do a needs assessment. And so, again, for the organizational standards, all community action agencies need to do a needs assessment at least once every 3 years. I just also want to add that the standard for strategic planning says that you only have to do a strategic plan every 5 years. I would strongly encourage agencies to use a 3-year strategic planning cycle, again, for the purposes of making sure you are connecting your needs assessment and strategic planning process. If you wait a year or two after you've done your needs assessment to do your strategic plan, you're using old data, you've lost momentum, there may have been turnover on your board or with other stakeholders who would be involved in the process. So I always encourage agencies to do your strategic planning process as soon as is reasonably feasible after you've done your needs assessment. That helps make sure those two processes are connected with each other and that you're using good data for your strategic planning process, and I just think it really just makes the whole community action planning cycle run much more smoothly. But other than that, I think those are all the questions that we've received.
All right. Thank you, Gerald. So just to kind of show you guys some resources that are out there, so these are some general resources. We've actually shared these before, so these are not new through the other webinars we did, and they're really around the requirements and the roles of the community needs assessment or the different pieces, so it really goes through that whole process. So there's 4 different resources that cover that pretty well. And of course, that top one is around the organizational standards category 3, so it helps you to see what is required to be in the community needs assessment as far as monitoring goes. Then we have several different resources around data collection and analysis. So this is kind of covering resources related to the past 2 webinars that we've done. But there's, of course, our Community Commons Comprehensive Needs Assessment tool. So this is where you can go to gather a lot of your secondary data for your community needs assessment. The domains that are in there align with the domains of the CSPG, and so it can be a very helpful tool to get those statistics and that secondary data. Of course, there's some other community needs assessment guides that go further into the qualitative data collection, such as focus groups, surveys, give you some sample questions even. Then also, there's a couple different other databases you can go to. So the census, of course, American Fact Finder. You can go to this guide for SurveyMonkey. It walks through some basic survey tips, smart survey design, and then the living wage calculator is another one to check out. And then as far as sharing and utilizing your community needs assessment, there are several resources around that. A few we've already talked about, but there's some social media, there's a social media webinar that the national partners did, so there's a recording link to that. Also, there's a story guide and brochure from NASCAST, so some information from NASCAST around storytelling. Also looking for infographic webinars from NISCA can be helpful. Virtual CAP often has many resources around community needs assessment. And then, of course, the ones that we've already kind of talked about, Pick-to-Chart, Wordle, Canva, can be very helpful. And then also check out talkpoverty.org for what people are talking about on there and how people are sharing their information. And then, of course, just a call out to have you make sure you're sharing with us at the Community Action Partnership, because we want to retweet or share your information as well to kind of get it out there nationwide. So, you know, you can do this with other partner agencies in your community as well to make sure that other people are sharing your information, but definitely tag us too so that we can share it throughout the nation and share stories from other community action agencies so each organization can see examples. That can be helpful as well. And then finally, this is our contact information. So Jarl, contact information is up at the top, mine is at the bottom. Feel free to contact us with any further questions that you have around communicating your community needs assessment or just any of the other topics around the community needs assessment. We are going to be putting out a resource page on the website. So we're in the process of gathering all the different resources around community needs assessment and kind of vetting those so that we're putting kind of the cream of the crop out there for you all to access, organizing it so it's easy to find. So check back under the tools and resources section of the website for that, and we'll make sure we share it through our TNTA e-news letter as well. So I think that's about it. Jarl, did you have anything else?
Yeah, let's just thanks again to everyone for coming out to the webinar and joining us. Like I said, you can access recordings of the webinar from our homepage under the events link. If you just scroll down, you should be able to find the webinars link under that. We've archived all the webinars and the slide decks there, and we'll very shortly be uploading those to our video library, which you can access through that tools and resources link. So again, again, if you have any other questions, any follow-up about either the Community Needs Assessment or other training and technical assistance that we can support you with, please don't hesitate to reach out directly to either Courtney or myself. So thank you all again. I hope this has been a helpful webinar. Hope everyone is getting ready to have a happy Thanksgiving, and hopefully we will see you on the road or at our Management Leadership Training Conference, second week of January in Houston, Texas. So have a great week, folks. Thanks again, and have a great Thanksgiving.